Welcome to Chatterfuse, where truth cuts deeper than headlines. Before we begin, please note, this video contains content based on public testimony, intended for commentary and informational purposes only. All individuals mentioned are presumed innocent unless proven guilty in a court of law. Viewer discretion is advised. When Cassie stepped into that courtroom, the room expected the usual pain, maybe even scandal. But no one was ready for the name she whispered on the stand. Michael B. Jordan. Not a tabloid, not a rumor, not a headline from 2016. She said it, under oath. And the moment she did, Diddy's entire composure cracked. This was supposed to be his trial, a high-stakes battle over trafficking allegations, manipulation, and power. But now, it's a front-row seat to one of the most unexpected love triangles Hollywood never saw coming. What began as federal testimony turned into something far more personal, an emotional landmine that detonated in real time. Cassie wasn't just testifying, she was pulling the curtain back on a life lived under control, and a secret connection that nearly cost her everything. And let's just say, Diddy did not take it well. But what really happened between Cassie and Michael? How did their paths even cross? And what exactly did Diddy do when he found out? You're watching Chatterfuse. Don't blink, because what's coming next will stun you. At first glance, this trial was supposed to be about power, money, and allegations as dark as they come. Not Hollywood affairs or celebrity whispers. Sean Diddy Combs walked into that federal courtroom facing accusations most artists wouldn't survive. Sex trafficking, manipulation, and long-term psychological control over multiple women, with Cassie Ventura front and center as the most high-profile witness. She wasn't some distant ex airing dirty laundry. Cassie was the woman who stood by Diddy's side for over a decade, through award shows, fashion campaigns, and platinum records. But behind those glossy red carpet photos, prosecutors argued, was a very different reality. According to court filings and first-hand testimony, Diddy didn't just dominate the music industry, he allegedly dominated lives, micromanaging movements, restricting access to friends and family, and blurring the lines between protection and possession. Jury selection wrapped quickly. Too quickly, some said. Opening statements hinted that the trial would expose not just a man, but an entire system built on silence, loyalty, and fear. Cassie, once seen as the model girlfriend, walked into court not as a victim of a breakup, but a survivor of something far deeper, something institutional, something calculated. And as the public watched the live stream clips and headlines rolled across every outlet from CNN to TMZ, one thing became clear. This wasn't just a courtroom, it was a stage. And the next act would be unforgettable. Because just when the jury thought they understood Cassie's story, she dropped the kind of detail that wasn't in any legal brief, the kind that changes everything. Michael B. Jordan, a name that doesn't belong in a federal trafficking trial. But there it was, spoken calmly, deliberately, and under oath. And in that split second, the courtroom stopped breathing. Cassie had just turned a legal proceeding into something far more intimate. She wasn't just describing years of control or trauma, she was revealing the single moment she slipped through the cracks, emotionally, quietly, into something that looked like freedom. She called it an emotional affair. But for Cassie, it was more than that. It was relief. A break in the psychological storm. She painted a picture of Michael not as a scandal, but as sanctuary. Someone who asked how she was feeling, not where she was going. Someone who listened instead of surveilled. And while the court stayed quiet, all eyes flicked toward Diddy. He didn't flinch, not obviously, but the tension in his jaw, the way his fingers wrapped tight around the defense table, it spoke louder than any outburst. This wasn't just betrayal, it was humiliation, in front of a jury, reporters, and the industry he once controlled. Cassie never dramatized the details. She didn't need to. Her words carried the weight of years lived under scrutiny, finally unspooling in front of strangers. The emotional bond with Michael was brief, yes, but for her, it was everything Diddy wasn't. Present, gentle, human. And while she described that fleeting connection, you could feel the story shifting. This wasn't just about what happened to her, it was about what she found in spite of it. A name that shouldn't have come up in a trafficking trial, but it did. Spoken clearly, under oath. And for a moment, the entire courtroom froze. Cassie had just made things personal. This wasn't just about trauma or control anymore. It was about the one moment she broke through, into something that felt like peace. She called it an emotional affair, but to her, it was more than that. It was relief, a pause in the chaos. Michael wasn't a scandal. He was a sanctuary, someone who listened, who asked how she felt, not where she was. And while the room stayed silent, all eyes landed on Diddy. He didn't react, not with words. But the jaw tension, the clenched grip on the table, it said enough. This wasn't just betrayal, it was humiliation. Cassie didn't embellish. She didn't need to. The bond with Michael may have been brief, but in her story, he was everything Diddy wasn't. Gentle, present, human. And in that moment, the courtroom dynamic shifted. This wasn't just about what she endured. It was about what she found despite it. If there's one thing Diddy couldn't stand, it was losing control. And when he realized Cassie's mind, and maybe even her heart, had wandered beyond his reach, he didn't just get angry, he got strategic. Courtroom testimony laid bare what happened next. Diddy wasn't just reacting emotionally, he was retaliating systematically. He reportedly pulled Cassie from scheduled shoots, revoked her access to key industry events, and had his team scrub her from public visibility. One day, she was set to appear at a fashion campaign in LA. The next, she was unavailable due to travel conflicts. Only there was no travel, just Diddy pulling strings behind the curtain. But it didn't stop there. Sources say he blacklisted anyone connected to Michael B. Jordan from projects linked to his empire, liquor brands, music deals, even fashion collaborations. You weren't just siding with Cassie, you were crossing a man who built an entire career on fear and access. Behind closed doors, Diddy allegedly played both roles, the tyrant and the charmer. There were apologies, promises, tears, therapy offers, even talk of marriage. But it was all temporary. Calculated waves of affection followed by crushing isolation. Friends Cassie once trusted stopped picking up her calls, not because they didn't care, because they were afraid. He wasn't just isolating her physically. He was erasing her support system, one connection at a time. And that's what made the emotional affair with Michael so dangerous to him. It wasn't sex, it wasn't public, it was hope. And in Diddy's world, hope is a threat. For a man with a name that set the courtroom on fire, Michael B. Jordan never even entered the building. And yet, his presence was everywhere. Cassie didn't describe him like a fling. She didn't paint him as a fantasy or a secret scandal. She spoke about him with a kind of reverence, like he represented something outside the madness. They met by chance during filming overseas, two people in the same orbit for a moment. But to Cassie, that moment was a crack in the glass. Michael wasn't the reason she wanted to escape. He was the first reminder that escape was even possible. He didn't post about her, didn't leak anything, didn't make it weird. While Diddy was monitoring her every move, Michael just asked how her day was going. And in Cassie's world, that small human kindness felt revolutionary. Behind the scenes, insiders say Michael kept everything quiet, even as the story blew up years later. No interviews, no statements, no denials, just silence, the kind that people started to notice. Some called it dignity, others called it fear. Because when you're dealing with someone like Diddy, staying quiet can be the only form of self-protection you have. But in that courtroom, being quiet can be the only form of self-protection you have. But in that courtroom, Cassie didn't flinch when his name came up. She confirmed the bond, not with dramatics, but with calm. No apologies, no shame. Because what Michael gave her wasn't scandal. It was peace, even if just for a moment, and that's exactly what made it unforgettable. By the time Cassie returned to the stand for her final testimony, the courtroom had already heard enough to shake foundations. But what came next? That wasn't just testimony, it was transformation. She didn't dodge the hard questions. She didn't paint herself as innocent. In fact, she owned everything. From the emotional affair with Michael B. Jordan to her own role in enabling the toxic machine she'd lived inside. She talked about the burner phone, the lies, the disappearances, but she didn't frame it as betrayal. She framed it as survival. And when the prosecution asked why she stayed with Diddy for so long, her answer wasn't rehearsed. It was raw. She said she didn't know how to leave a life that had taught her to fear freedom, that the abuse wasn't just physical, it was mental architecture designed to collapse if she ever tried to walk away. Jurors didn't just listen. They watched. They saw a woman torn between guilt and clarity, a woman who had once arranged what she called freak-offs for her partner, now choking up as she explained why she complied, not to protect him, but to protect herself. It wasn't an excuse, it was a mirror, one that reflected the twisted logic that comes from years of control, manipulation, and silence. And somewhere in that final hour of testimony, something shifted. Cassie stopped being just a former girlfriend. She stopped being just a witness. She became something far more complex and far harder to ignore. To the jury, she wasn't just testifying against Diddy anymore. She was fighting for herself. So in the end, what started as a federal courtroom battle over power, trafficking, and control spiraled into something far more personal and far more revealing. Cassie didn't just testify about the past, she exposed the machinery behind Diddy's empire, how loyalty was weaponized, how silence was bought, and how even the smallest glimpse of freedom could be seen as betrayal. Michael B. Jordan never testified. He never had to. Because in Cassie's story, he wasn't a scandal. He was a symbol of normalcy, of peace, of what life could have looked like outside the luxury prison she'd been stuck in for over a decade. And while Diddy's defense tried to spin her affair as proof she had agency, it only made her pain more human and her survival more believable. Cassie may have returned to Diddy physically, but emotionally, that connection with Michael had already marked her escape route. She just hadn't walked it yet. Today, she's a mother, a wife, and more importantly, she's no longer silent. Meanwhile, Diddy? He's still flanked by lawyers, PR spin, and a reputation collapsing in real time. Funny how the most powerful man in the room was ultimately undone by the one woman he never thought would speak. You're watching Chatter Fuse, where celebrity headlines get the truth they deserve. If this story hit you, like, subscribe, and drop a comment below. Was Cassie's confession justice, or just the beginning of a much bigger reckoning? Because here, the drama doesn't fade when the cameras stop. It just gets louder.